Today we got a question from Nathan, who sends me an email and says, Chewy, what is the worst screw job that you've seen in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu competitions? You must be a pro wrestling fan using the word screw job. So what is the worst screw job that I've ever seen? Bro, I've watched so many matches, I couldn't tell you what the worst one I've ever seen is. Some of you guys watching this, if you've seen a really bad egregious call in a particular competition, you can throw it down in the comments below. But I'll share one that I've experienced both as a coach and then one particularly bad call as a competitor myself back when I was a blue belt. So as a coach, probably the worst one I ever experienced was back, I talked about this in a recent video, back when one of my black belts, who was a very accomplished competitor, and he was having his very first black belt match. And again, I shared this in the video recently. We're there, he feels good, his energy's good, his mental state is good, he's confident, he's feeling loose. He went through the Ghee check at the IBJJF tournament. They said everything's good. He's ready to go. He goes out and he's competing against this really tough competitor, a very accomplished competitor at black belt. Very good. And they start going, and they're going, and it's a good fight for the first few minutes. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there is a ref that comes out and it wasn't anything to do with this particular match, comes out of nowhere and says, we got to stop this match. He says, we have to stop this match. He can't wear that Ghee. And so I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm screaming because I'm behind the guardrail area. If you've ever been to an IBJJF tournament and he brings him over, he says, he can't wear this Ghee. I'm like, why can't he wear the Ghee? It's long enough. He made it through Ghee check, everything else. And he shows me the belt buckle. If you guys have ever had a Origin Ghee, there's this small little plastic clip, right? Just locks in place. I like it because, again, you don't have to tie your pants anymore. And again, their pants are more fitted than traditional baggy Ghee pants. And he said he can't wear this. This clip is dangerous. Now, there's some irony in that situation, right? I'm watching two grown men try to yank on each other's joints and slam each other into the ground, and they're button heads and everything else. But the plastic clip, oh, that's the dangerous part, right? It's the world's most dangerous Ghee right there. So, I couldn't help but laugh. But anyway, my student then has to run around, and the whole team's running around trying to secure him another Ghee. We found a Ghee that was a little too big for him, but they allowed it to pass. And he goes back out there. Now, meanwhile, his opponent has been sitting there, just breathing and relaxing, catching his breath. My student, meanwhile, is running around. They go back and they roll, and his focus was broken, and the match was from there. That was a pretty bad one. That was one of those ones where you always expect some funky calls at a competition. You just know they're going to happen. But that was like, that was really bad. That was worse than maybe you got screwed over for a point, or maybe, they gave you a kind of a weak DQ or something like it. It was kind of rough. Now, the worst one that I've ever had, I'll preface it with this. I haven't had a lot of bad calls on me. Typically, I'm a pretty good competitor. I know how to play the points. I know how to play the rules that I'm involved in, and I know how to make my game work within that. So I'm usually pretty good about not getting called for certain things. The issue sometimes that I've had is that I like to be very aggressive, and sometimes opponents can be very they compete like cowards. They stall out. You'll get guys where they back up to the edge of the mat instead of just standing there and fighting it out. And so I've had that happen, but nothing too crazy. But anyway, the worst call I've ever had was when I was a blue belt back in 2005. And to give you sort of a lay of the land, so to speak, back then, the things that we were touchy about in competition were not the things that you're touchy about. So the reap was not a thing. I did not know what a reap was until about 2008. As a purple belt, I was like, oh, there's a reap? What is that? Right? Back in the day, I'm old, been doing jiu-jitsu for 20 years now. If that foot come across, you're supposed to move it out of the way. Now, you may not be able to do heel hooks and stuff like that as a blue belt, but they didn't really care about the reap. And there was a lot of stuff they just didn't care about. But the thing everybody was touchy about back in 2005 and 2003 and 2004 was the damn neck crank, the can opener, just pulling on someone's neck. There was always a big fuss about it. And it was because a lot of the wrestlers, you can think of Jeff Munson and those guys back then, they would come in and they would just can opener the crap out of someone. You'd have this giant hulking wrestler grabbing someone's neck, and the technical ability had not evolved off the back to counter that yet. And so it was a tough thing to deal with. Nowadays, it's very easy to understand. We know how to counter it very easily. But you have these giant men doing this. And so the neck crank was a big deal back then. So I'm grappling with this guy. I get put in a triangle. And as I get caught in the triangle, I'm cutting an angle, and I'm grabbing behind the guy's shoulder, pulling myself in as the guy's on his back here, and I'm turning into him, and my hand's cupping his back. And then the ref just stops the match. And I look at the ref. I'm like, I'm not submitting. I'm not tapping. I'm fighting. Let me keep going. And the ref says, no, you weren't submitted. I know. And then he gets up and he says, you neck cranked him. And he raises the other guy's hand. And then the other guy is looking at me going, no. Like he didn't neck crank me. Let's go back and fight it. Just put me back in the triangle. We'll finish this match out because we're both having a good match, right? And we both have some competitive honor to us. Nobody wants to win that way. If you're honorable, right, you actually want to win. I've seen guys in competition do that. They'll do that like weak stuff where they'll like push a foot across. And one of my students had this happen. He was competing, and this guy pushed his foot over and goes, makes a little scream. The ref DQs my student, right? And then this guy gets up, and one of my buddies was recording. He winks at his coach across there. Like this was a strategy. One of my student told me later on that same guy had won several matches like that. There's no honor in that, right? And so both of us wanted to fight it out, win or lose. But the ref was like, nope, you're done. And again, that was an expensive trip for me back in 2005 to go up there where I was competing and to get robbed for something I wasn't even doing. So again, not the worst call, but that's the worst one I've ever had sort of pushed on me, was basically getting called, being DQ'd for a neck crank as I'm fighting out of a triangle submission. It didn't make much sense. But anyway, that was the worst one. So not that bad. What I'll ask for you guys now is, have you guys had any really bad, as we'll say, use Nathan's language, have you guys had any screw jobs that you've had pushed on you, teammates, friends, coaches, or ones that you've seen in competitions yourself? Tell me what you think, or tell me your thoughts on your experiences. Put those down in the comments. I'll check them out. And Nathan, that is the answer to your question. Appreciate it. And I'll talk to you guys next time.